welcome everyone again to today's peer call. My name is Liz Taylor, Assistant Director here at the National Rural Transit Assistance Program. Today we'll be talking about the different ways states allocate their Section 5310 and 5311 funds. We had a really good discussion on this topic at the State Program Manager Roundtable at our Technical Assistance Conference in Omaha in the fall. And this is an opportunity here to continue the conversation with a wider audience. So we have program managers from 2 state DOTs here to talk about their programs, and we really hope that other states will share what they do and ask questions and get the conversation going. So we have Kari Banta. She's the program manager for RTAP and Section 5310 at Texas DOT. Marcel Eddington is the 5310 program manager at Michigan DOT, and Kim Johnson is the Transportation Services section manager at Michigan DOT. And Marcel and Kari are both members of the National RTAP Review Board. So we're gonna first talk about 5310 and then talk about 5311. We'll have a time after Kari and Marcel and Kim speak to have some questions and discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Kari, and we look forward to hearing from them and from all of you. Kari?
Thanks, Liz. I'm Kari Banta. Just a quick overview of Section 5310 in Texas. This is our first time with a 2-year cycle. We ask our applicants to submit 2 12-month budgets. We do a grant period of 16 months. So it starts in September 1st and ends the following December. We're handling the second year with amendments. We're fortunate enough this year, it's our second time going through the application cycle with eGrants, online grant management system. A lot easier than spreadsheets and Word documents, but it's got its own challenges. Our funds, we allocate the funds by district, which gets kind of funky. That gets into our administrative code, the exact calculation there. Our awards are based on merit. Everything is scored. And any residual funds, either from the open call or previous calls, can be shifted around the state, depending on merit and need. We're looking for the second year, and we're just starting to do this now, looking at funding based on first-year performance. So how well the project meets the objectives, and in some cases, looking at the actual expenses, if there was a delayed start, for example, or if the demand for the service was over or under what they anticipated. We've been making a real effort to try to get budgets accurate for what's being spent so that we don't carry over funds that haven't been spent. Sometimes we've had up to 1.2 million in residual funding, and we get about 7 million a year, so you can see that's kind of the scale. And we have more demand in our rural areas than our urban. We move about 1/3 of the small urban funds over, and from what I understand, that's pretty common, but I'll be interested to hear what y'all have to say. Next slide, please. So our scoring process this past cycle was the first time that we scored internally. We used to have stakeholders in the different districts score. That was difficult to convene stakeholders who had the right amount of knowledge but weren't also involved in one of the projects. So we look based on the original coordinated plans and public involvement meetings where we talk directly with riders or other members of the public who came out. There were also online survey options, and we had a 1-800 number that people could call to leave comments. The staff don't have any association with the districts they're scoring, so they can be neutral on the topic. It's a 100-point scale. We broke it up by quartiles this time. It just happened to work out that the bottom quartile didn't receive funding, but it kind of works. We see how much we can reasonably fund, and usually there's kind of a line that we see between projects that look like they're viable and ones that aren't. And we give priority to supporting existing service. And Texas, we're fortunate, we have transportation development credits, and they can cover the local match for capital. Operating still requires a local match, and pretty much everyone takes advantage of those TDCs, because that's you know, a big challenge in a lot of places is coming up with that local match. I think that's it for Texas.
Okay, thanks, Kari. And we'll have an opportunity for questions when Marcel's done. So, Marcel?
Thanks, Liz. Good afternoon, everyone. As Liz said, I am the program manager for the 5310 program in Michigan. And our program is an annual application cycle. Our funds are allocated throughout the state, and they're split between small urban and rural. We have a 55% of the 5310 funds for traditional projects, or 5310 projects. The remaining funds go to the New Freedom activities. And if we have any funds after those projects are funded, then we will go to the 5310 projects for replacement vehicles or vehicles that were locally purchased, expansion vehicles. The applications are evaluated using criteria, and in the handout that you're going to receive, or that's attached here, there are our annual application instructions available on our website. So there's a criteria that we go through for each application, and the projects are determined to be eligible, and they're prioritized using a specific priority listing also in the annual application. Next slide, please. Okay, so Michigan does have a capital match. We match 20%. The operating is locally matched. Our capital contracts are for a 3-year period, and our operating, our mobility management, and marketing are for a 1-year period. Our New Freedom activities are applied through rural and small urban selection through a competitive review process. If there is insufficient funds for eligible projects, contracts are awarded based on a review and ranking by MDOT OPT staff, which is the Office of Passenger Transportation staff, using a predetermined criteria also available in our application. Projects are funded starting with the highest ranking priority based on a priority ranking list. Next slide. So that's
okay. Thank you both for that overview. And yeah, if for people who want to read the full, most of this is on that handout, but it is in the handout section of the control panel if you want to see that link. Kari also provided hers for Texas, and Bill Talovsky provided this kind of summary plus the links for both 5310 and 5311 in New York. So we wanted to hear from participants about how you guys do anything differently with your 5310 funds, how you allocate. These are just some potential discussion questions, and we do have the ability to do polls. So I think we're going to do a couple quick polls and then hopefully hear from some of you and raise your hand and share what you do or ask questions of Kari or Marcel. So let me launch one of these polls. So the poll should be open. If you can answer. Once we get a certain percentage, we'll close it and share the results. Okay, just a few more seconds. All right, it looks like we're 52% voted is as good as we're going to get. So I'm going to close that and share it. So you should be able to see the results. So we have a majority due annually, 64%, and then the rest every 2 years. So that's great. All right, I'm going to do the other poll about 5310. You guys want to fill this one out? Okay, just another couple seconds. Okay, great. So let's share that one. So for this one, 71% do capital and operating, and then 29% for capital expenses only. So great. So we'd love to hear from the audience, or Kari and Marcel if you have any questions to ask each other. But how do other states allocate their 5310 funds that differ from this? Or if you've switched from 1 year to a 2 year, every 2 year application cycle, you know, why? How did you do it? What were the steps you took? Anyone on the line want to share? Just raise your hand or submit a question or comment in the questions box. Okay, Robin. Robin, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
So I wanted to ask about contract operations, because I know it's not just straight operating 50-50 and it's not capital. It's when you contract, or say your human service agency or your city contracts with you, the transit agency, and can use 5310 at, I think it's a capital match rate. And I know Oregon does this a whole lot in highly rural areas, and Iowa does this. And I was wondering if there were any other states that, and you could just put it in the chat box, that you use your 5310 for contract operations.
Kari and Marcel, do you want to answer that, or does anyone else?
Sure, I can answer. Actually, we call it purchase of service, just as shorthand here, and it's a really popular. We go by the capital rate, so it's 80% federal, and then the 20% local match or TDCs. But that's actually been a growing category for us.
Yeah, you know, Oregon moves. What is it? I think it's 21 million of STP into 5310, and in the highly rural areas, it ends up being like 80. It's a base of about 80,000 a year that people get. That they put in, a lot of them do put it into contract ops, because 20% is a lot less than 50%.
Carrie Ruse commented, thanks Carrie, that from Nebraska, that Nebraska also does purchase service. We have a question here from Lindsay Post for Kari. She wanted to know specifically about the TCD in Texas, or the TDC. How long have the credits been used, and did voters approve that program?
That's a really good question. We've had them as long as I've been here, which is 4 years. I'm not sure if it was voter approved. I know it's related to toll credits. I think at one point they were called toll credits. and it's something that we report to the FTA via trams. I can find out more about that and get back to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Any other questions or different ways? Another thing was with Marcel, do you want to talk about how you guys flex the federal highway funds?
This is Kim from Michigan.
Hi, Kim.
We have rural task forces throughout the state, and it's made up of the county road commission, townships, and the transit agency within each county. And there's STP funds that are allocated to each task force. And then they locally select projects, a transit project or a highway project. And then any transit projects that they select, we then flex those funds from FHWA to FTA to use for the transit. It's been going on for at least 10 years, and we still have issues in some of the areas because it starts out as highway funds that the road commissions just look at it as highway funds. But we are working, I mean, they're supposed to reach consensus on the project, and so a lot of them, transit does get some money for a bus like every other year, every 3 years, or for equipment, which we aren't able to fund equipment really out of any other funding, so it's helped with some smaller projects like that. And sometimes where it's just the 5310 agency in the county, they do receive some money for transit projects.
Does any other states on the line do that?
We haven't really run across other states, and I'm not really sure. I mean, here it looked like legally FHWA is supposed to make these funds available for different transportation projects, and so our state has been proactive to do that. But I guess I thought it was happening in other states, but it doesn't seem like it really is.
Well, that is what the Oregon STP transfer is. It's from the state transportation program, and it's a multimodal, but as far as I can tell, I agree with you, Kim, that not many states transfer large amounts into the transit program, and I think that Washington State has moved some over when they were doing some of their larger projects on, around the Seattle area and around facility development.
Because I've seen it done sometimes at the state level, but I haven't really seen it done locally like this in other states. And we do, I mean, it's not a lot of money, but it is. I mean, we get about between $2 million and $2.5 million a year for transit projects. So it's not a whole lot of money, but it is helpful. And sometimes it's a lot of trouble to get that money, but it does help the agencies to get some capital that we can't fund other ways.
Well, isn't that about the same amount as, well, you guys might get more for 5339. So
no, it's actually, yeah, it is. We only get 1.7 in 5339, so it is more than that.
So that's great.
All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions about 5310, we can move on and hear about 5311, and then continue the conversation after that. So, Kari, do you want to talk about 5311 in Texas?
Sure. I'm going to start right off. I'm the 5310 and RTAP person, so my specific knowledge of 5311 is going to be a little limited, so I might not be able to answer all the questions. Several years ago, we decided to do a coordinated call to include all of the 5311, 5339, and 5304 funds. That actually started a couple of years ago that we moved to a 2-year cycle. The decision was to alternate it with 5310 to reduce the administrative burden on our agencies and us, which was very nice, and also to give some more budgeting certainty and to promote capacity development with internal planning of budgeting. Again, we've got TDCs available for the local match when match is required. Our allocation, we have a formula that's laid out in our administrative code that was actually just revised this year to change things up a bit. First, we pull out the intercity bus. There's a split between land area and population, weighted population. We also look at performance. One issue that Texas faces, and I feel like I say this every time I'm talking about Texas, is that it's really big. So we do have to consider land area. Next slide. And we try to keep the award amounts consistent. So because there's also a performance aspect, the award should be no less than 90% of what they've gotten previously. We've had some situations with, for example, Galveston after Hurricane Ike went from being a large urban to a small urban. So we've had to make some certain allowances as different places develop and grow. So there's the statutory amount, that 20 million and change is actually what is in the administrative code. And that's how we pick out the rural discretionary. And we've just switched, part of what just switched in the administrative code is that we're looking at total vehicle miles, not just vehicle revenue miles. And again, that's to account for the size of the state, especially when you get out into the western part of the state where we have transit districts that are probably larger than some states. And the scoring, and this has been the case for a while now, the scoring is done by field staff, and the staff who represent the districts abstain from scoring those applications. And we get a team, it's a subset, and we rotate through who does the scoring. I think that's everything for 5311.
Cool, thanks, Kari. Marcel or Kim?
Yeah. Hi, this is Kim.
Thanks.
I'm going to start a little different, but for our transit agencies, we have 180 million that we give out in state funds for operating. It's for both the rural and the urban public transit agencies. So it's not the 5310 agencies, but it's for any public agency in the state. So then for the rural agencies, we use our 5311 to provide some more operating assistance to the rural agencies. So they submit a budget each year in our public transit management system. And then we take the eligible expenses from those budgets and we provide right now we're providing 18.5 of their eligible expenses out of 5311. It's changed. I mean, I think when it started at like 13% and we've been able to increase it to 18%. But right now we're getting to the point where we're probably going to have to reduce it a little bit because the rural expenses are growing so much. And it's in a lot of urban areas, their rural part, they're really expanding to do a lot of non-emergency medical. And so that's driven statewide the eligible expenses up a lot. So the local match for that is the local bus operating that we provide for rural agencies. That covers about 40% of their eligible expenses right now. So they get 40 out of state, they get 18.5 out of federal, and then the rest is made up of local funds. Either there's a lot of local millages or general fund from the city or the county, and then other types of funding like advertising, so of maintenance services, different things like that. We don't use any of our formula allocation for 5311 for capital because we have that program where we get flex the FHWA funds. That's for, most of that is for 5311 agencies. A small percent goes to some 5310s, but that's mostly 5311. So they'll get their capital there or through our 5339, which we use entirely for rural 5311 agencies. Next slide. So then we do use the 15% of our 5311 for intercity, and we have 5 subsidized routes that we do, mostly up in the northern part of Michigan, the more rural area in the UP, and we provide both the operating and capital for that service. And then we use a small portion. We use about $900,000 every year for staff, for our staff, and we track activities every 2 weeks of a quarter to make sure that the continuing percent we're using is 5311 eligible. And then we have continued funding the JARC services in the rural area using 5311. It's about $2 million, I think, of our funding each year goes to JARC, and because of the so much growing on the regular service for 5311, we have not allowed any JARC expansion at all. It's just really continuation. So a lot of them are getting so much in JARC, but then they're rolling some of their other JARC expenses over into their regular service, and that's getting funded at the 18.5. That's all we have.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kim. Okay, so first let me do a couple polls, and then Zenosa from Mississippi has her hand raised. And I do want to note that we do have, I see 5, looks like representatives of the state's DOTs from Arizona, North and South Dakota, Mississippi, and Nebraska. So if any of you care to chime in and share what you do in your states or anything different, that would be great. But let's do a couple polls here. So again, what's your application cycle if it's different from 5311? You can respond with that. Okay, just another second. All right, so that's more even than the last one. So 46 annually and 54 biennially. And then the other one, the other idea we had for a poll was about JARC and if you still fund those activities. So we'll ask that one. Okay, we'll just leave that open for another couple seconds. Okay, 50-50 was that one, so that's interesting. Okay, thank you so much. Let me go to Zenosa, and I'm going to unmute you, Zenosa, so go ahead and ask your question or share your comment. Zenosa, are you there? All right, well, Zenosa, whenever you're ready, you are unmuted. Does anyone else have, so here were some discussion question ideas on 5311, how if your state allocates your 5311 funds differently, about JARC activities, if you still fund that. And Marcel, do you want to talk, or Kim, do you want to talk about, you had mentioned that you guys do super grants?
Well, yeah, I do a super grant for the 5310 program, and that basically entails the Grand Rapids area because they chose not to administer their 5310 programs to the subrecipients eligible in their area. Then we also have our 53 traditional, and then we have our flex program rolled into it, as well as our new freedom activities. So that, I mean, our super grant is very complex.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the
But it lets us only have one grant, so instead of doing one for Grand Rapids and one for us and one for the Flex,
yes,
it's all rolled into one, so it's good and bad.
right.
Mhm.
And I believe the 5311 program she's also doing a super grant this year.
We haven't in the past. We've had the regular formula in one grant, and then we have the Flex in a different grant.
Mm-hmm. But when I was talking to Stuart, he was leaning toward that. So it was requested by FTA to do the super grant.
We have a question. Robin, who's our executive director, had a question. How do you fund startups and new systems for 5311? If Kari and Marcel or Kim, if you want to speak to that.
I can. In Michigan, we used to have a program where we would fund higher percents for them in the first 3 years, and it was state funding that we did that with, and we don't have that anymore. So when a new system comes in, it's usually like a 5310 rolling into a more public system that gets funded out of 5311. So they have to have, I mean, we just fund them at the same percent. So they get the 40% from the state and the 18.5 from the federal, and they need to have in place enough local to meet the rest of that, whatever percent that is, 30%. So we don't really have a different startup program anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We actually have the opposite problem from a startup program. We've got some districts who the operators have actually gotten out of business for one reason or another. So we've had sometimes mid-cycle an agency taking over operation of another transit district. So we've actually, that's something else that went into our administrative code updates, is looking at how those funds are apportioned to be able to help the economic impact of taking in an area that was probably, performance-wise not doing as well. And there, might be other situations involved. But we haven't had a new transit district, and that's how we fund things. We haven't had a new transit district, at least as long as I've been here.
And Kari, do you guys still fund JARC activities or not specifically?
We expended all of our JARC funding, and actually for the programs that continued after, they were able to get funding from the employer to fill in. So I think we've got 2 or 3 that are continuing in the state, but we don't continue to fund them through 5311.
Got it. And I think you were mentioning that you're kind of reevaluating or doing it every 2 years. Could you speak at all to what you guys are kind of looking at, or how that's been going?
So far it's been going well. We're just starting our second 2-year cycle for the coordinated call for the 5311. And it's gone well. As I mentioned with the 5310, we're just at the midpoint of the our first 2-year cycle. So that's because it's merit-based, that's a little more, involving a little more analysis in terms of what funding to move ahead on. But no, it's worked great for us. It's enabled us to do a lot more capacity building, technical assistance for the agencies, and we've really appreciated it.
Yeah, and helping them plan and have a little more stability.
Definitely.
And Robin asks, what are you guys doing with intercity in Texas? If you might not be involved in that, but if you know.
I'm not involved. I do know that, for example, Greyhound is a recipient, but we do have other systems who are as well. And that's 15% of the 5311 apportionment goes to intercity.
Sarah Fitzgerald from Arizona, I'm going to unmute you now if you want to ask your question or make your comment. You're now unmuted. Sarah? Or Zanosa, you're both unmuted. All right, well, if you'd like to ask your question or share from about Mississippi or Arizona, that'd be great. Someone has a comment about being able to speak. So I also don't have a mic on my computer, so I'm calling in by the phone. So just a reminder, if you want to make sure that we can hear you, go to your audio tab on the control panel and switch from computer audio to phone and dial in using the phone number and access code there, which will enable you to make sure you can speak. But Sarah did ask her question by chat, and she said in Arizona, they have a 2-year grant cycle for 5311 and 1-year cycle for 5310, and they're both done as super grants. So Sarah, if you wanted to comment further, definitely call in, that'd be great. But thank you for submitting that. And
yeah, here in Texas, we haven't gotten into super grants yet.
Yeah. Here, hold on. Does anyone else want to comment on 5311 or 5310 or anything else about how your state allocates it? I mean, another thing to think about is kind of why your states do it this way, or why the priorities are set as they are. Like Marcel, you guys mentioned the criteria and evaluating them, and if those change, how frequently do those kinds of priorities change, or the scoring based on what the goals are in the state for the transit programs and mobility? Kari and Marcel, maybe you guys could speak to that.
Well, actually, we haven't had to use, this is Michigan, we haven't had to use our priorities because of the applications we've got. We've had enough money to fund all the requests that we've got in 5310 and New Freedom. So it hasn't been an issue in at least the last 5 years. So
we haven't had enough to fund everything, unfortunately. We do go by the priority, the principal one being maintaining existing service, looking at what the actual expense rate is, and a big factor is the agency's capacity to manage one of our grants, especially if it's a new grantee, and the feasibility of the project. So that the amount of funding we have is generally enough to cover what is merited. And then with the residuals, a lot of times with the residual funding, we try to put that toward capital. Some of the districts, with the way it's split up across the state, I think maybe the Laredo district, they only get about $50,000, and that's split between 3 different subrecipients generally. So it may be the situation where the only way that we can make an award to an agency to get a vehicle would be through the residual funds.
I think one reason that we have enough money is because we have the big local bus operating program. So I think that really covers a lot of the services. And so we've been able to use the 5310 for just some bus replacement, and we've been able to keep up with that with the 5310 funds.
Sarah, I'm going to unmute you now if you want to talk. Sarah, are you there?
Okay, hi there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sorry about that.
Sorry about that. It was my fault. I just wanted to comment on Arizona. So we do a 2-year cycle for 5311. We're actually in an open call for our second 2-year contract as such. But for 5310, haven't switched over, and definitely have seen a lot of administrative benefits from the 2-year cycle with 5311, which is great. But with 5310, the challenge is that we don't have the same agencies coming in year on year. So it's a little bit harder for us to move to a 2-year program with that. But administratively within the state, it's much easier on the 2-year cycle. And then I was going to comment on the new programs. So with new programs, we make sure that they have to have a transit feasibility plan first. So we have a couple of new systems right now, and they may not be ready to go into operating this October, but we have them apply anyway and work with them. And we have an administration operations ratio. I don't know if any other states have that, where we don't like systems to spend more than 30% of their awarded funds in administration. But for new systems, we waive that first for the first couple of years while they get going. So that's just a comment on the new system.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
And we had a question here about explaining what is a super grant. If Kim or Marcel, you wouldn't mind.
Sure. A super grant is just basically a combination of all of your projects and placed into one grant. What I do is I take my projects and split them up into sections, and each section I put into trams. And so Grand Rapids would be like my project 1. So all of their smaller projects are placed in that subsection. And then I split them up the next to 5310 rural. So I have a project for that. And then I have a project for their small urban. So it's basically just broken down into subsections, and you place those projects in there, so you have like individual little pots of money that you can draw down on from trams. And I mean, sometimes it's a good thing because you don't have a lot of grants out there, but then, like I said, I'm getting into the part where I'm amending my super grant this year, and moving money around is kind of difficult because we used to be able to wait till the end of the year to move money, and we could still draw down on the grant. Now we're unable to do that. We have to amend the grant and move the projects around. Say, for instance, the transit agency decided that they didn't want a bus, and they determined that they wanted to move or fund something else. So we allow them to do that, or they have extra money left over from a bus and they want to use it for equipment. So that would be different scopes. So you have to move your money from your vehicle scope to your equipment scope. So I think it's going to be a lot more amendments or a lot more changes, and the transit agencies won't be able to draw down or get paid as quickly.
If we're going to geek out and talk scopes for a moment, just this year we switched to using the 5310 only scopes. The new ALI codes that came out, the ALI tree from FTA, I want to say it was in 2016, and I can't remember them off the top of my head, but that's made it easier for us to move the funding around, because it's everything except for operating and state admin are under the same scope.
Say that again, Kari.
For the 5310, there is a scope code that's specifically for 5310. I want to say it's like 640 or 460, but everything except for the operating expenses and for the state admin go under the same scope code.
Oh,
That'd make it easier.
that would make it a lot easier.
We'll have to look at that.
That's great. If one thing came out of this call, that sounds like really useful information. Rachel from Idaho said in the chat that Idaho does 2-year grant cycles for congressional appropriations, and on the in-between year, they do a one-time grant to get old funds out the door on capital type projects that are non-sustainable, and that Idaho also doesn't receive funding, state funding, so they have to prioritize, especially 5311, and they're over requested on funding and have a weighted scoring template that's both qualitative and quantitative, and the office scores the projects internally. So thanks, Rachel, for sharing that. Robin, Rachel has another question. Do other states allow in-kind for 5310 providers?
Yes, we do.
Yes,
Yeah.
we do too for New Freedom activities.
We do for all 5310.
Yeah, we provide the match. See, Michigan provides the match for everything except New Freedom Operating. So that's the only one where they have a local match requirement. So we do allow the in-kind for that.
Yes, in Oregon says, Robin says yes, they do that in Oregon, the match in kind. And Sarah says from Arizona that in kind is allowed for 5310, but not for capital expenses. Some other questions. Is there a separate process for allocating inner city funds? I don't know if you guys are involved in the process for inner city, but are you familiar with the process for that?
In Michigan, we use the funds for subsidizing routes. So we actually go out to bid for a provider to provide the service, and then we fund the capital and the operating for that service. So it's not really a call for projects per se.
Mm-hmm.
We do a call for projects, and it is for capital and operating.
Another question, how do you use planning to support your project or program allocations for 5310 and 5311? If you do.
Our 5310 program, the way that we judge the individual projects is based on the goals and objectives that are identified in the plans. So we're really dependent on the development of the plans. Also in getting 5310 providers and 5310 clients as stakeholders in the planning groups.
Do the plans include, that was for the human services plan?
Right, yeah.
What
yeah,
about the
human
5311?
I know that we ask how the project relates to the coordinated plan. I know that's a factor. I don't know how we weight it exactly, but I do know it's something that we look for.
Mm-hmm. Sarah mentioned about Arizona that the state funds inner city through the normal grant process, but it's not a separate call for projects. Question about super grants, is the reporting for those done separately, or is it all kind of done together?
It's all done together.
Okay. Any other questions from any other attendees? Okay. I did want to note that AASHTO's Multi-State Technical Assistance Program also has calls and webinars and other resources for member states for 5310 and 5311 program managers. And there was a call in December 2016, similar to this one, that specifically focused on these discussion questions. And on MTAP's website, they have a report that has responses to these questions from 15 states. So if you're interested in this information, it's available on their website, slightly different from things that we talked about today, or some of them overlap, but just wanted to mention that. So if people have follow-up questions, let us know and read that handout. And if there's anything else you want to share, we'd love to hear it. So if there aren't any further questions, I think we can wrap it up. So just want to thank everyone again for joining today, and thank you so much to Kari, Marcel, and to Kim, and also to Bill, who couldn't be with us today, for sharing his information in the handout and participating in the preparations. And thanks everyone who joined and who shared on the call, and we hope you got something out of it. Look for the recording, slides, and handout within a week. It'll be posted on our website, and we hope that you join us for a future peer call or webinar, and that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you all very much.